Hi, I'm eMpTyG.
And I'm Kenny, and welcome back to another episode of Good Clean Commander.
Heck yeah. And today we're going to be checking out a fun redemption game where basically we had all played commanders that had lost from a previous commander game that we had played together. So hoping to, show off some shenanigans that you may have missed with the first time we played these decks.
Yeah, coming back this week, we have Aaron and Natasha, who by this point everybody should know. They've been on several times. So I hope we are all able to redeem in one way or another in here.
You're always redeemed in my heart. I hope that's a compliment, not that you ever had to redeem yourself. Okay, let's go check out the games. One game.
And have a
good clean game.
Good clean game.
Aaron is playing Mayael the Anima. This deck wants to use Mayael's ability to cheat out big threats like Blightsteel Colossus or Avacyn Angel of Hope to outvalue the table and win through combat damage. And in Aaron's starting hand, he has a forest, Rhythm of the Wild, Plains, a mountain, Xenagos God of Revels, Avacyn Angel of Hope, and a Noxious Revival. I am playing Elenda and Azor. This deck is focused on using blink strategies to outvalue my opponents. My goal is to win through combat damage through Akroma's Will or blink Grey Merchant of Asphodel to drain out the table. And in my starting hand, I have a Temple of Silence, an Island, Charming Prince, Amiria's Call, Hollowed Fountain, Counterspell, and a Crush Contraband. Natasha is playing Brago Keen Eternal. This is another blink deck that wants to win through combat damage and uses repeated value to remove major threats, blink mana rocks, and draw all the cards. And in her starting hand, she has a Basalt Monolith, an Island, a Plains, Boreal Shelf, Ojutai Monument, Watcher for Tomorrow, and a Peregrine Drake. Ken is playing Mishra, Claimed by Gix. This deck is focused on draining out the board using Mishra's ability by making a lot of bodies and attacking each combat. And in Ken's starting hand, he has a Mountain, Buried Rune, Takenuma Abandoned Mire, Wayfarer's Bauble, Westvale Abbey, Krenko 10 Street Kingpin, and a Liliana Dreadhorde General. Aaron starts off the game by drawing and playing a forest, and passes to me. I draw and play a tapped Temple of Silence, which allows me to scry one on its ETB. I decide to put that card to the bottom of the library and pass the turn. Natasha draws for turn and plays a tapped Sajiri Refuge. On ETB, Nat gains 1 life and passes the turn to Ken. Ken draws and plays a Takenuma Abandoned Mire. He then pays 1 to cast a Wayfarer's Bauble, and with that he passes to Aaron. Aaron draws for turn and plays a mountain as land for turn. He then passes to me. I untap and draw for turn. I then play an island and follow that up by paying 2 for a Charming Prince. On its ETB, I choose to scry 2, leaving both cards on top of my library. With no other plays, I pass the turn to Nat. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays an island. She then pays 2 for a Felwar Stone. With that, she passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Buried Ruin. He then passes the turn. Aaron draws and plays a Plains as land for turn. He then pays 3 for a Rhythm of the Wild, which gives his non-token creatures Riot, and his creature spells can't be countered. He then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play a tapped Hollowed Fountain. I then move to combat, swinging my Charming Prince at Ken for 2 damage. With no response or blocks, he takes the 2, going to 38 life. After combat, I pass the turn. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Boreal Shelf. She then follows that up by paying 3 for a Basalt Monolith. Using Basalt for 3 more mana, Nat then casts a Command Sphere and passes the turn. On Natasha's end step, Ken pays 2 and cracks his Wayfarer's Bauble, putting a tapped mountain into play. Ken then starts his turn, untaps, and draws. Playing a Westvale Abbey as land for turn, Ken then pays 3 for a Krenko 10 Street Kingpin. Having no other plays, Ken passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a forest as land for turn. Paying 3, he casts his commander, Mayael the Anima, and chooses to give them a +1/+1 counter thanks to Rhythm of the Wild, giving them Riot. He then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play an Emeria Shattered Skyclave, paying 3 for it to enter the battlefield untapped, going to 37 life. I then pay 4 and cast Brago, King Eternal, and brag about getting Nat's commander out before her. I then swing Charming Prince at Ken again, thinking that he wouldn't block with Krenko. Ken declares no blocks and takes the damage, going to 36. I then pass to Nat. Nat untaps everything but the Basalt Monolith and draws for turn. She then plays a Temple of the False God as land for turn and pays 3 for Ojutai Monument. Nat follows that up by paying 2 for a Watcher for tomorrow, which I just call Anxiety. On ETB, Watcher has Hideaway 4, which allows her to look at the top 4 cards of her library and exile 1 with Watcher, and when Watcher leaves the battlefield, she can put that card to hand. Nat makes her Hideaway choice and passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and moves to combat, swinging Krenko at Natasha. On attack, Krenko gets a +1/+1 counter on it, which puts its power at 2. Because of this, Ken makes 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Nat can't block and takes 2 damage, going to 39. Ken then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Plains as land for turn. He then pays 5 for Xenagos, God of Revels. I tell the table that I have an answer to it, and with that, Aaron puts a +1/+1 counter on Xenagos, which he could not technically do here because his devotion was not to 7, so they entered as an enchantment. Because I said I had an answer, Aaron moves to combat, giving Mayael +3 to their attack power thanks to Xenagos, and swings at me for 6 commander damage. I then drop down to 31 life. Aaron passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and pay 4 to cast Crush Contraband, which will allow me to exile target enchantment or artifact. I target Xenagos and the Basalt Monolith. Natasha and Aaron have no responses, so both are exiled. Moving to combat, I swing Brago and Charming Prince at Aaron for 6 damage. Aaron takes the damage and my Brago triggers. I choose to blink both my creatures to untap them and select to scry 2 with Charming Prince's ETB trigger. I leave 1 card on top and scry the other to the bottom. I then pass the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and pays 1 for a Soul Ring, building up her collection of mana rocks. Paying 4, she casts her commando Brago, King Eternal, and now we are twinsies. She then passes the turn, not wanting to draw any ire at the table. Ken untaps, draws, and plays his commander Mishra, claimed by Gix. Moving to combat, Ken swings Krenko at Aaron and a 1/1 goblin at Nat and I. On attack, Krenko will trigger and Ken makes 3 1/1 goblins. Mishra also triggers and each opponent will lose 3 life and Ken gains 3. Aaron is unable to block and takes 3 damage. Natasha and I both block the little gobos, thinking our Brago force 2 for their service. He then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a mountain as land for turn. He then pays 6 for Mayael's ability. This allows Aaron to look at the top 5 cards of his library and put a creature card into play without paying its mana cost. Aaron puts a Regal Behemoth into play and the rest of the cards he looked at with Mayael's ability on the bottom of his library. When Regal Behemoth hits the battlefield, Aaron becomes the Monarch. When Aaron is the Monarch, he can add 1 mana of any color to his mana pool. Rhythm of the Wild triggers, and Aaron gives Behemoth a +1/+1 counter. He then moves to end step and draws a card for Monarch. I untap, draw, and play a Plains as land for turn. I then cast an Urtai Resurrected for 4 mana and choose to destroy Mishra with its ETB trigger. Ken has no response, so Mishra is put back into the command zone and Ken draws a card from Urtai. Moving to combat, I swing Brago at Ken, and he can't block, so he takes the 2 in the air. Brago then triggers, and I choose to blink all my creatures, having Urtai ETB first. I select the destroy trigger again, and declare Aaron's Regal Behemoth as its target. Aaron responds by casting Flawless Maneuver for free because he controls his commander, and all of his creatures gain indestructible. I have Charming Prince ETB next, and Blink eMpTyG, which will return at the next end step. I then move to end step and eMpTyG ETBs, where I declare its ability to destroy Nat's Brago. Since Aaron's board is now indestructible, Nat has no response, so her commander is destroyed, and I pass the turn. Natasha untaps, draws, and she realizes she didn't draw for eMpTyG, so we let her draw. She then asks the table what we think the bigger problem is, and everyone decides that eMpTyG is. I say I'm okay with them blowing it up as long as they have an answer to Mayael, which will be more of a problem later. Ken tells Nat that he can deal with Mayael if Nat deals with eMpTyG. Aaron says he'll give Monarch to Nat if she just blows up the eMpTyG and leaves his Mayael alone. Nat asks if he will try to take it back from her, and Aaron has no follow-up on whether he will or not. Nat decides to take Ken's deal instead and goes for my eMpTyG. Paying 5, Nat casts Peregrine Drake. When at ETB, she can untap 5 lands. She then pays 7 for a Spine of Ishsa. On ETB, she can destroy target permanent and selects eMpTyG. I have no response, and eMpTyG is destroyed. I jokingly tell the table they have traded one Blink Evil for another. Nat then passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and upholding his end of the deal, casts Terminate for 2, targeting Mayael. Aaron has no 2 life, going back to 27 life, and then draw a card from Spirited Companion. Not finding any answers here, I then pass the turn. Natasha untaps, draws, and recasts her commando Brago for 6 mana. Deciding to risk it, she taps out for a Cloud Blazer. On ETB, she draws 2 cards and gains 2 life, going back up to 38. Natasha then passes the turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Castle Empress as land for turn. Having no other plays, he then passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Kessig Wolf Run as land for turn. He then pays 4 mana to cast a Tribute to the World Tree, floating a green mana. Using the floating green, he then pays another 2 mana to cast his commander, Mayael, and gives them haste from the Rhythm's trigger. Tribute to the World triggers as well, and Mayael gets 2 +1/+1 counters. Since Aaron is still the Monarch, he is able to float a red and a white mana from the tap lands he used to cast his commander. Using the mana, he pays 6 into his commander's ability and puts Blightsteel Colossus into play. While it's on the stack, Natasha asks what Aaron's plans are with that Blightsteel. Aaron, at that question, chooses to give it a +1/+1 counter instead of haste with Rhythm's trigger to give us a chance to deal with it. Going to combat, Aaron swings Avacyn at Natasha for 9 flying damage. Natasha declares no blocks and takes the 9 damage. Aaron then passes the turn. I untap, draw, and play an island as land for turn. Hoping to dig for an answer, I swing at Ken with Brago for 2 damage and blink my creatures. I have Charming Prince ETB first and Scry 2. I put both cards to the bottom and then have Spirited Companion ETB next to draw a card. Not finding anything, I pass the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and attempts to cast Reality Acid targeting the Blightsteel Colossus. This enchantment allows her to chant any permanent on the battlefield, and when it leaves the battlefield, that permanent must be sacrificed. Aaron has no response, and Reality Acid resolves. Paying 7, she then casts a Mirror Battlesphere. On ETB, Mirror Battlesphere makes 4 1/1 mirror tokens. Moving to combat, Natasha asks if someone can let her get a free swing with Brago. I say she can hit me, knowing this will help get rid of the Blightsteel when Brago blinks the Reality Acid. I take 2 damage from Brago, going to 25 life, and choosing to blink the Reality Acid, Aaron is forced to sacrifice Blightsteel when Reality Acid leaves the battlefield. She chooses Avacyn as its new target, and then Blightsteel is shuffled into Aaron's library as per its ability on its card. Moving on to the rest of the blink triggers, Natasha blinks the Battlesphere and makes another 4 mirrors. The Cloud Blazer enters next, so Nat draws 2 cards and gains 2 life, and then the Peregrine Drake enters again and it untaps 5 lands, and then Watcher of Tomorrow, aka Anxiety, enters the battlefield after that, and she hides away for 4 again. And she also blinks all of her mana rocks and tapping all of them and leaves the Spine of Ishsa alone, since Aaron's board is indestructible and she doesn't want to hurt our board in case it helps, overthrow the Monarch here. She then pays 1 for a Ristic Remora. Paying another 2, she casts a Talisman of Progress. And finally, Nat pays 7 for a Resolute Archangel. When it enters the battlefield, Nat's life goes back to 40. With that impressive turn, she passes to Ken. Ken draws and then pays 2 for a Feed the Swarm targeting the Resolute Angel. Nat has no response, and Ken loses 7 life, going to 20 as part of Feed the Swarm's cost. He follows that up by paying 3 for a Phyrexian Dragon Engine and passes the turn. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Prismatic Vista as land for turn. He then pays 1 life and sacrifices it to fetch up a basic forest. He then pays 8 and leaves a white floating mana to cast Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. Tribute to the World triggers, and Aaron draws a card. Rhythm of the Wild also triggers, and he gives it haste. Tapping out, Aaron then casts Craterhoof Behemoth, giving all of his creatures +6/+6 and trample. Using the floating white, he casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Peregrine Drake. Mystic Remora triggers, and Aaron can't pay for it, so Natasha draws 1. Unable to find an answer, her Drake is exiled, and she gains 3 life from Swords. Before going to combat, Aaron realizes he needs to draw from Tribute to the World tree because of Craterhoof ETBing. He then decides to go to combat and swings Avacyn, Gisela, and Mayael at Natasha, Craterhoof and Green Warden at me, and the Regal Behemoth at Ken. In response to attacks, I pay 3 for Teferi's Protection to phase out. Natasha and Ken take a lethal amount of damage. Second main phase, Aaron pays 2 life for a Noxious Revival, getting his swords back to hand. Phasing back in, I draw for turn and hope to top deck Farewell or Sunfall. I sadly do not, and play a tapped Rafine's Tower as land for turn. I then follow that up by paying 4 for a Teleportation Circle and Blink Spirited Companion at end step, hoping to find something that will help. I do not, and pass the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 7 for an Avenger of Zendikar. On ETB, it makes 9 plant tokens. He follows that up by playing a Plains as land for turn, and this gives all of his plant tokens a +1/+1 counter. He then pays 12 for a Finale of Devastation with X equaling 10. While this is going on, Ken and I are teasing Aaron, saying that he's dirtling like we're in Historic Brawl, so I draw on an Infinity token to create an immersive experience. He searches for Blightsteel and puts it onto the battlefield, giving it haste with Rhythm's trigger. Finally moving to combat, Aaron swings out, and I'm hecka dead. GG's all. I think we got our patooties kicked here. They're gone.
I did nothing.
I did.
I was
one
there.
Cool I pretty much.
Aaron finally had his first win on the channel, which is wild that we got to this point he hadn't yet. But oh boy, did he win!
Yeah, it stopped us. So I think I just had that like one cool play, and then with like Urtai blink, and then I just suffered the rest of the match. And I didn't cast my commander again. That's why I brought her back was to redeem it. And then I didn't realize I had the opportunity to like recast them and die, and I just forgot to do it again.
I mean, at this point, you can ever cast that commander, I think.
I took the deck apart, but she's retired. Goodbye. I think Azor ruined it.
She worked hard?
She tried so hard and never got cast.
Poor thing.
It didn't even matter.
MVP card of the episode. What is it?
Rhythm of the Wild, because there are several times where I had counter magic up to stop Aaron's shenanigans, but I couldn't counter the spells because, you know, the can't be countered thing. Specifically, one of them was like Avacyn, and then later I think Blightsteel I was going to try to counter, but I couldn't, so
it was so done by then.
Yeah, so all the shenanigans there for sure, but yeah, so that was cool.
Big congrats to Aaron. So claps, your victory.
Claps be had.
GG, Aaron.
Well, on that note, if you like the video, please drop a like and comment if you are so brave to comment. We appreciate it. Letting us know what you thought of the game. And we did have it a little different because this originally was just going to be like our normal banter kind of video, but decided to just have it be a voiceover gameplay instead while we're working on kind of a format change up. So you got to see our pretty faces while I narrated. So yeah.
Yes. Stay tuned for those format changes. We got some exciting things in the works.
Heck yeah. Yeah.
I just need to unpack.
Yeah, between my teepees getting pulled and you moving, this was a week.
We're here, but barely.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, if you're here still, thank you so much for watching till the end. Have a good one, and bye.